We're on DAF Samech Zayin Amud Aleph, and we're up to the word Gufa. What we had concluded yesterday is that Shmuel paskins like Rabbi Yossi, that when a husband gives verbal instructions only to an agent to take care of a get for him, that agent does not have the authority to hire a sofer and to get edim unless the husband himself dispatches those people. And we had said even yesterday that there is a policy that the Amoraim seem to agree with, which is that if a man goes to two guys, he says, "You're my agents to arrange for the get a sofer and get two other guys to sign on the get." It's kosher if it's done that way, but it should not be, lechatchila should not be done. We didn't explain why, and we're going to talk about that shortly. But certainly according to Rabbi Yossi, that's way. And Shmuel paskins like Rabbi Yossi. The only thing that he's equivocal about is whether Rabbi Yossi would hold, what about a case where a husband gives explicit instructions to the agents, and he says, "I hereby give you permission to say to a sofer in my name," right? In other words, when the husband gives those kinds of explicit instructions, even if they're implicit, that I don't expect you to sign, but I want someone else to sign or to write, is that valid or not? And that's something that Shmuel left off with a suffix, which is why he had a suffix yesterday. But Gufa, Amar Shmuel, Amar Rabbi, Halacha Rabbi Yossi, D'Amar Mili Lo Mimsran L'Shaliach. So Shmuel said that that's the halacha. We paskin like Rabbi, that verbal instructions to take care of a get, but to an agent, the agent does not have a right to delegate that writing to other people. So Amar Lefan of Reb Shimon Berebi. So Reb Shimon, the son of Rabbi, asked Shmuel. He said, "Me'achar sheReb Meir v'Chanina ishanu cholkin al Reb Yossi, ma ra'a Rebbe lomar halacha k'Reb Yossi." He says, I don't understand. If Reb Meir and Chanina, who had brought testimony from the prison where Rabbi Akiva was, paskin not like Reb Yossi. They argue with Reb Yossi, and they say that you are allowed to delegate that dispatch, that assignment to other people. Like if the husband says, take care of the get, there's no problem for you to hire someone, a sofer, and to get other edim to sign it. So then why would Rebbe paskin like Rabbi Yossi if you have Reb Meir and Rabbi Chanina and Rabbi Akiva arguing? So Amar lo shtok b'ni shtok, lo ra'isi es Rabbi Yossi, ilmali ra'iso nimoko imo. So he said to him, be silent, my son, be silent. Had you seen or ever heard shir from Rabbi Yossi, you would understand why Rebbe paskins like Rabbi Yossi, because nimuko imo, because his depth is with him. Everything that he taught, he had a crystal clear explanation for, and therefore it's very logical to paskin like Rabbi Yossi, even in the face of great Tanoim that are his colleagues. The Tanya, and here's the brisa that describes the greatness of a series of Tanoim. Isi ben Yehuda hayamona shvachan shel chachamim. That Isi ben Yehuda enumerated the praise of these various Tanoim. Rabbi Meir Chacham v'Sofer. Rabbi Meir was a wise man and a scribe. He used to write Sifrei Torah. Rabbi Yehuda Chacham l'chesheyirtze. Rabbi Yehuda is a wise man when he wants to be. Now that sounds almost like an insult, right? But it's not. Rashi explains that Rabbi Yehuda used to go into a very, very deep meditative state in order to arrive at ultimate truth about Torah ideas, and he had to bring himself into that very, very deep state in order to be able to delve and find out the truth. And like Tosfos speaks out, the difference between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda was Rabbi Meir was sharp as a tack, and so he didn't have to think at all. Like someone would say something to this medrash, Rabbi Meir was charif, he would immediately shoot back, right? Rabbi Yehuda was much more deliberate, took his time, but when he took his time, he came up with truths that were even more profound than Rabbi Meir, because he was so pensive in thought. Rabbi Tarfon gal shel agozim. Rabbi Tarfon is a pile of nuts. Now that also sounds weird, right? But what does it mean? So Rashi says, if you got a pile of nuts, and you pull out one of the nuts from the bottom of the pile, then you see a cascading of all of the other nuts down the pile. Rabbi Tarfon was someone who was able to connect the dots to all different parts of Torah. So if you would ask him about one question, he would be able to bring you sources from all and connect all different kinds of ideas from all different places to answer that question, even if it was from a localized issue. And Rabbi Yishmael Chanus Miyuzenes. Rabbi Yishmael is a well-stocked store, which means that whatever question you would ask him, he would have the answer for. Can you answer me something in Zroim? Got it. Can you answer me something in Kudshim? Got it. Nashim? Got it. Right? Anywhere you asked him, he was there. Rabbi Akiva Otsar Balum. Rabbi Akiva was a sealed repository. Now, what that means is, according to Rashi, is that you could have what I think of when I think of this is I have a toolbox that has all these different compartments in it. One for the nails, one for the screws. But in perfumeries they have this also, a box with many different compartments in it, and you don't mix the different compartments. See, Rabbi Akiva over the years learned all different kinds of Torah teachings, but they were never organized properly. And he spent a lifetime of Torah study pulling apart all the different components and organizing them properly in their different repositories. So when you would ask him something, he would answer a question in one subject, pulling from all different years of learning that he had gotten from his teachers, but he had stored them away. Everything was properly organized, and that was his great strength. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri kupas harochlim, and Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah kupas shel besamim. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri is a peddler's box. An itinerant peddler goes from town to town. But he's got to have a little bit of everything. And that's what he was like. You'd ask him, you got any matches? Yeah, got it. You got any thread and thimbles? Got it. In other words, he always made sure that he was like a kolbo. He had everything. And Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah was a kupa shel b'samim. He didn't have necessarily language from information of everything, but whatever he brought you was beautifully scented. It was like a perfume box. In other words, he always had a beautiful response. Mishnas Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov kav v'naki. The teaching of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov was always clean and properly filtered. And that means that he didn't necessarily know all different parts of Torah. He didn't say a lot, but whatever he said, you could be sure that it was absolutely filtered and pure. Rabbi Yossi Nimuko Imo, Rabbi Yossi's depth was with him. He always explained things very carefully. And Rabbi Shimon Tochen Harbi Umotzi Kima. Rabbi Shimon grinds up a lot and produces a small amount. Now when you take a huge amount of grain and you only produce a small amount of flour, what does that mean? The flour is the finest quality. It's been sifted so many times that you've removed any impurities, and that's what this means. And Tana Mishakeach Kimo Mashamotzi Inomotzi Elasubin. The Brisa learns it a little bit differently. The Brisa says it's referring to the amount that he forgets. Rabbi Shimon would forget only a small amount of his learning, and the only things that he would forget would be the bran, or the chaff, meaning that he would discard, the things that he would discard from his mind were the confused issues that were not conveyed correctly in the first place, so therefore the retention was amazing, and the only things that he forgot were things that were a little bit garbled to begin with. V'chein omer Reb Shimon letalmidav bonai shanu midosai shemidosai trumos mitrumos midosov shel Rabbi Akiva. And that's why Reb Shimon said to his students, he said, my sons, learn from my ways, because my ways are the tithes of Rabbi Akiva. In other words, what I've tried to do is to purify and filter all of the teachings of Rabbi Akiva and present them to you in the most presentable format. Gufa. So let's go back to what we had learned about, where we had said that all the rabbis agree that a person should not do this. Amar l'shnayim imru l'sofer v'yichtov l'ploni u'ploni v'yachtamu. Amar Rav Huna Amar Rav kosher v'lo se'asa zos b'Yisrael. That if a person says to two agents, he says, guys, I want you to take care of my get, go get a sofer and have him write the get, and go get these two witnesses, Reuven and Shimon, and have them as signatories. Now, it's kosher if you do that, but you really shouldn't do it. Lechatchila, we don't permit you to do it. And the question, of course, is why? What's the big deal? What did the guy do that was so objectionable? So Amar le'ula l'Rav Nachman, Varmi l'Rav Nachman le'ula, me'acher de kosher, ma'lo se'asazos b'Yisrael. He says, if it's kosher, then what's wrong with it? Amar le' chayshinan shemet tiskor edim. We're worried that maybe the wife will hire witnesses and she'll forge the get. In other words, and the Gemara is really in the middle of an answer. We're worried that if we allow this, this will cause the wife to actually forge a get when the husband has no objective at all in divorcing her, has no interest at all in divorcing her, and she just wants to get out, so she'll hire false witnesses to have them, and they'll falsify a get. So the Gemara says, Umichai Shinan. So first of all, since when are we worried about such a thing? V'hatanya edim hachasumim al sdei mekach v'al get isha lo chashu chachamim l'dover zeh. So we're never worried about a falsified, forged get. Anytime you see a bill of sale of a piece of real estate or a get, as long as the witnesses are willing to testify, that's our signature. We never are choshesh that these are false witnesses. We always admit this in a court of law. So why should we ever be worried about that? So the Gemara answers, and this explains why dafka this activity is forbidden. Ma'iselo avdi dibura ka'amri. And as Rashi says, it's true. We never suspect that a fruma yid is ever going to willingly falsify information and sign his name to it. But here's what we are worried about. We're worried about that he's going to get information and innocently believe that information and sign his name to something that he didn't witness. In other words, let's say two agents come over to me one day and they say, Rabbi Yid, we want to tell you, we represent Mr. Schwartz, and Mr. Schwartz told us that he would like you to write a get, or he'd like you to be a signatory on his get. Would you help us out, please? We're in a bind. And so he innocently says, okay, sure, I want to help Mr. Schwartz. He's a friend of mine. I'll be happy to help. And they write up the get, and he signs it saying that Mr. Schwartz wants to divorce his wife. See, the problem is that because he didn't hear it directly from Mr. Schwartz, he doesn't know for sure that Mr. Schwartz wants to divorce his wife. So it could be that Mr. Schwartz really hired these agents and had them speak to me and get me to sign and these agents are misrepresenting. So that we are worried about. We're not worried that any person is willingly going to sign his name to sheker, but we are worried that there will be collusion to get a guy to divorce his wife when it's not really a divorce, and to take an unwitting accomplice to sign his name to something that he doesn't even know is sheker. And that's why we don't allow witnesses to sign their names unless they hear directly from the balabas, I want to divorce my wife. If the husband directly tells him, I want to divorce my wife, only then do we allow them to divorce his wife. And that's why we don't allow a husband to speak to agents to hire witnesses. So the Gemara says now, Amr l'shnayim imr l'sofer v'yichdo v'atem chasomu, Rav Chisda Amr kosher v'lo se'ase, Rabbi bar bar Chana Amr kosher v'teyase. Now what about in the following case, which we also examined yesterday? What if a husband says to two agents, listen, hire a sofer, have him write the get, and the two of you can sign it. And here the husband is speaking directly to the people that he wants to be the witnesses. So here there's no concern that maybe there'll be an unwitting witness who thinks that he's signing on behalf of the husband and is really not. But some rabbis say that we're gozer this case to the other case. That in any situation where any party, including the sofer, does not hear it directly from the husband, we don't allow it, even when the witnesses themselves have heard it. So it's a machlokas whether this is lechatchila okay or whether it's not okay. Everyone agrees that b'di'evid it's okay. But Rav Nachman Amar Kosher v'lo se'asa, Rav Sheshus Amar Kosher v'se'asa. These two rabbis also argue. And Rabba Amar Kosher v'lo se'asa and Rav Yosef Amar Kosher v'teyasa. V'icha da'apich lehu. And then we have Rabbi and Rav Yosef. One says kosher and lichatchila, one says only b'di'evid, and some reverse those last two opinions. Next, Amar la'asara kivsvu get. Then we saw in the last part of the Mishnah that if a man goes over to 10 people and he says, I want you to write a get for my wife and give it to her, so then only one person needs to be the sofer and 2 other people need to be the witnesses, and the other 7 don't have to participate. But if he says, all of you, then all 10 have to be participants, they have to be signatories on the get. So the Brisa just elaborates, and it says, Tana Rabbanan Amar la'asara kisvu get utnu li'ishti, echad kaisev al yidei kulam. That if a man goes over to 10 people and says, write a get for my wife and give it to her, then you only need one person to actually write the get. But if he says, kulchem ksovu, echad kaisev b'mamad kulam, but if he says, I want all of you to write it, obviously he doesn't mean everyone to hold the pen. That's not practical. But what he does require is that the sofer write it in the presence of the other 9. Then, holichu get leishti, echad molich al yedei kulam. But kulchem holichu, echad molich b'maimad kulam. And also there'll be a difference if he says to the 10 people, please transport the get to my wife, then he only requires one of the 10 to actually transport it. But if he says, all of you transport the get to my wife, then all 10 of them have to travel with the courier and make sure that he brings it to the wife. Now, ibayilahu, mana osan or mina osan mahu. The question now is, what if, I think it's mana, what if the husband counts each one by number? And what that means is that he goes over to a group of 10 and he goes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc. And he says, write a get and take it to my wife. Now, what does he mean by counting them? He didn't say kulchem, but he counted each one of them. So Rav Huna Amar Mana Eno Kekulchem, and Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Elazar Demin Roma Amar Mana Harehu Kekulchem. So Rav Huna says that he hasn't said all of you, and therefore they don't all have to participate in the get. But Rabbi Yochanan, in the name of Rabbi Elazar of Rome, says no. The fact that he said 1, 2, 3, 4, that does imply that he wants all of them to participate, and that's tantamount to saying kulchem. Amar Rav Papa v'lo pligi, hadamana kulhu v'hadamana miktsasaihu, amri la lahaigisa v'amri la lahaigisa. And Rav Papa says something very interesting. He says there's really no machlokes. They're talking about 2 different cases. In one case, you went from 1 to 10, pointing to all 10, going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And in the other case, you only counted, let's say, a part of them. You said 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then you stopped. Now, some people say, now there's 2 ways of understanding. So, one way of understanding is when you count to 10, you mean to include everyone and require everyone to participate. If you only count up to 6, so then you sort of gave up. And you don't require the full amount. You just require one person to act as the scribe or whatever. Others learn just the opposite. When you go from 1 to 10, then you're not serious, and you just say, any one of you guys can do it. But when you count and you single out only 6 out of the 10, then you seriously want those 6 to be in some way the participants. So asking, I'm really sorry. I hate to be matriach, but I could use a glass of water, please. I'm really sorry. Otherwise, I'm going to keep on coughing. Asking Rav Yehuda begita de kulchem ksovu o kulchon o kolchad v'chad minchon chasomu o kulchon o kol trei minchon o vilu o kulchon o kolchad v'chad minchon. So Rav Yehuda was concerned. He said, look, anytime a person's going to go over to a group of people that's more than just 2 people, we have to worry that maybe he could try after the fact to invalidate the get by saying, well, since not all 10 guys participated, I want to invalidate the get. So in order to avoid that, he required that any time you have more than just 2 agents that you assign to take care of the get, you have to explicitly write in the get the following text. You have to say that I hereby authorize either all of you to write the get, or any one of you individually can write the get. Either all of you can sign the get, or any 2 of you individually can sign the get. Either all of you can transport it, or any one of you can transport it. So therefore, by being so explicit, you've sort of removed any possibility of a guy objecting after the fact. Thank you so much. Amar Rava. That's perfect, thank you. Amar Rava, Zimnin de Goyz Leila Dibure, Va'amar Kulchan, Va'amar Kol Chad Minchon, Va'asili Ifsula. So Rava objects. And he says, if you put in that text in the get, it could be there'll be sometimes that a sofer will truncate the language, and instead of writing either all of you write the get, or only one of you write the get. Maybe he'll just write either all of you write the get, and he won't write the second half. So therefore, and then the husband will have the opportunity once again to passel the get. So Ella Amar Rava Ksova Kol Chad Minchon Chasoma Kol Trei Minchon Ovila Kol Chad Minchon. And therefore Rava says, instead of being so verbose in the text, you just have the sofer write as follows. Any one of you can write the get, any two of you can sign on the get, and any one of you can transport the get. And if you write it that way, that covers all your bases. Hadron al Homer. Now we're going to really shift gears now.
So when the sofer writes it down, the husband had to have said that. He can't just write it. The husband must have actually said those words.
Well, if the husband objects to the writing, of course, then
but
it's
he's not
invalid
there.
also.
He just gave them instructions and left.
Right, so we would have to presume that the witnesses witnessed the husband giving those instructions as well, making sure that he's admitting to that. Misha achzo kordiakos v'amar kisvu gedli ishti lo amar klum. If a person gets into an altered mental state called kordiakos, which Rashi says is a result of drinking fresh wine from the press, drinking it excessively and getting to some level of intoxication or some altered state. So, and then he says, in that altered state, write a get for my wife. His words are totally invalid because he's not in the proper state of mind. Amar kisvu get leishti v'achazu kordiakus v'chazav armalotich devenu ein dvarav hachronim klum. If he says, write a get for my wife when he's lucid, then get into this altered state called kordiakos, and says, don't write a get for my wife, then we don't reckon with his last statement. He's not in his right mind. Nishtatek, now a totally different halacha. Let's say for whatever reason, a person becomes mute. He's not able to speak anymore. Maybe he's had a stroke. We don't know what happened, but he can't communicate verbally anymore. Va'amrulo nichtov gatli ishtecha v'hirkin barosho, and then we ask him, would you like us to write a get for your wife? Because he's given some signals. If he nods, then both can also shlosha pamim imamar al lav lav ve'al hein hein harei elu yichtavu v'yidnu. So we check him. We see, are you lucid enough to be able to nod your head in acknowledgement 3 times for yes questions, and are you able to shake your head no 3 times for no questions? Then you show that you know exactly what you're saying, and therefore your nodding is enough of an authorization to write a get. Now this is fascinating because I have to tell you, I had such a situation in LA a number of years ago where a fellow had a heart attack and his heart stopped beating for several minutes and became permanently disabled, does not speak anymore. He's in a convalescent home in LA. He and his wife were married for 4 months, and for 18 years his wife was an aguna. And there was a Rav that was friendly with him, and I got him involved, and he was able to do this kind of interrogation, and he paskened, that a get could be written for his wife, and she's now allowed to get married. Next, by kordiakos. So the question is, what is kordiakos? So the Gemara asks, what is this altered state? So Amar Shmuel, denachte chamer charata dema'atzarta, that if a person is overpowered by freshly pressed wine, it's a certain phenomenon that you can become in this intoxicated state because there's a certain demonic force that enters into freshly pressed wine. So the Gemara says, "V'lisni mishanashcho yain chadash." So why don't you just say that if a person is bitten, so to speak, by fresh wine, then he should. Then we don't reckon with his words. Why do you have to call it this strange name, kordiakos? So hakamashmalim daharucha kordiakos shema. It's telling me that the name of the demonic force that inhabits the wine is called kordiakos. L'may nafkamina. What difference does it make what its name is? Likemeya. For the purpose of making an amulet, because an amulet needs to ward off the demons, and you have to write the name of the demon in the amulet in order to ward off the spirits. So therefore, this is the reason why the Mishnah wants to inform us of this. Mayasu, say, how do you cure a person of this kordiakos mental state? So bisra sumka agumri, the chamra marka, you're supposed to take red meat, which means very lean meat, which doesn't have a lot of marbleization, is that what they call it? And you roast it on coals, and you give him very diluted wine, and if he eats and drinks that, that'll cure him. Amar Abaya, Amar Li'aim, L'shimsha bas yoma kuza demaya. That if a person is overtaken by shimsha, which is like heat stroke or sunstroke, he should, basically a fever, his body heat is elevated. So if it's only been for one day, just give him a flask or a container of water, and that'll cool him off. Bas treyomi sikore. If he's had a fever for 2 days, so then you should give him what's called sikori, which is just do a bloodletting. That'll relieve some of the pressure, and his body heat will go down. If he's had a fever for 3 days, do the same thing that we talked about for this kordiakos, which is to give him lean roasted meat and heavily diluted wine. Now, l'shimsha artikta. Now, what if a person has a prolonged fever, even more than that? So, leise tarnagolta uchma velikari shesi va'erev. First, take a black hen, shecht it and split it open with an X across its belly, so that it's all of its innards are exposed. Then give the patient, shave off the center of his head like a reverse mohawk. Place the hen on top of his scalp, and then let it sit there until it starts to become putrid. And then put him in the water, usually like in the river or in the mikveh, ad tzavari, until his neck, ad decholish alma ilui, until he grows faint, v'leimod v'lislik v'leisiv, and then he should get up, move around a little bit, and then sit down, v'ilo, and then so that'll cure him. Now, if you can't do that for whatever reason, leichol karte v'linchos v'leikom b'mayad tzavari ad decholish alma iluye v'leimod v'lislik v'leisiv. Then have him eat a lot of leek, and then put him in the water up until his neck, until he becomes faint, and then let him get up and move around, and then eventually sit down, and that'll cure him. L'shimsha, if he just has any kind of, my mother also told me, if it's just generic shimsha, which is, so she said also, bisra sumka agumri v'chamra marka. And I'm not sure if this is a Abaye speaking. This could just be the Gemara speaking, creating a contrast. That for a fever, take this lean roasted meat on coals and the heavily diluted wine, and that's what the patient should drink. Now, letalga, by contrast, what if a person's body heat is lowered? It's what we call for snowy shivers, meaning that his body heat is decreased. So bisra shmeina agumri v'chamra chaya. What you should do is you should take fatty meat, like heavily marbleized meat, roast that on coals, give him undiluted wine. That'll elevate his body heat, and that'll restore his health. Now the Gemara tells us a couple of interesting stories. Rav Amram Chasida ki hava mitzarin le beiresh galusa. Now these two stories relate to the mischievousness and the sort of cruelty of the servants that were in the exilarch's home. Rav Amram was a very pious man who used to deprive himself of worldly pleasures. Them knowing this, they basically told him, "Oh, Rabbi, you are such an ascetic, let's put you in the snow." Well, they locked him out of the house and left him in the snow all night to taunt him. So Havamagani le'atalga. So Lamachar Amrule, my nichal le'lamar. So when they brought him in, they said, "Oh, we forgot that we left you out in the snow." Wink, wink. So what can we do to help restore your body heat? So the delay sule. What can we bring you? So Amar Hani Kol Damina Lahu Meipach Apchi. He said, I know that these guys are tricksters. Whatever I tell them, they're going to do the exact opposite. So Amar Lahu Bisra Sumka Gumra V'Chamra Marka. I see Lahu Inu Bisra Shmeina Gumra V'Chamra Chaya. He said, you know what? Bring me some very lean meat roasted on coals and heavily diluted wine. And they brought him the exact opposite, which was very fatty meat and very undiluted wine, and he knew that would cure him of his lowered body heat. Shama Yalta Uma'ila Leila Bey Masusa. Yalta, who was Rav Nachman's wife, who was very frequent in the house of the Reish Kalusa, and she herself was a great chacham, so she heard that Rav Amram had these shivers, and so she brought him to the bathhouse. Umukmile b'maya de masusa, adamhavchi maya de masusa, vavudama v'koi bisrei pshiti pshiti. And she left him there in order for the water to warm him up. And he perspired out bloody sweat until the water turned red, and there appeared on his skin blotches of like white-looking coin-like blotches because I guess this was a sign that he was being cured of his coldness. Rav Yosef Yasik Berechaya, Rav Sheshis Yasik Bekishore, and Omar Gedola Malacha Shemechamemes is Be'aleha. These two rabbis, when they got the shivers and their body heat went down, they said strenuous exercise will elevate your body heat and make you warm. So they both engaged in strenuous exercise. Rav Yosef worked at the mill, and Rav Sheshis schlepped beams back and forth. And he used to say that work is great because it heats up the person who does work. It's great advice for all of us. A little bit of exercise will take off some of the chills and will make you healthy. Amrle Reish Galusa Rav Sheshis, my time ulosoid Margaba. Now another story of the Reish Galusa and his servants. He once said to Rav Sheshis, now just in order to get this story straight, remember Rav Sheshis is blind. So they said to Rav Sheshis, why aren't you dining with us, Rav Sheshis? I notice that you come to my house, but you don't sit down and dine with me. He says, because your servants are mischievous and devious people, and I don't even trust their kashrus. I believe that they would even take a limb from a live animal and feed it to me. So Amar Lei, mi yemar. So the Reish Galusa says, how can you say such a thing? So he says, Amar Lei hashta machvino lach. He says, here, I'll prove it to you. Amar Lei l'shame zil genov aisili chadakara michiyusa. He said to his, Rav Sheshis turns to his attendant, and he says, listen, my Talmud, go into the kitchen and sneak out one of the limbs of the animal that they've just shechted and are preparing to serve for dinner tonight. So Aisile, he brings it out. So Amar Lahu, Ahad Muli Hadami Dichiyusa. And then he turns to the servants of the Reish Galus and says, before you prepare the meal, I would just like to see and make sure that this animal looks kosher. Would you mind bringing me its 4 limbs so that I can examine them? So I see tlos kari, osivu kamei, amar lahu habala shalosh regalim havai. So he says they bring out the 3 limbs, that's all they can find, and he says to them, hey, why is this? I'm not going to eat a 3-legged animal, right? So psok aisu chada me alma, osivu kame. So what did they do? They went ahead and found an animal and cut off its leg that was similar to the animal that they had shechted, and they brought it, and they said, oh, we just found the 4th leg. So Amar le l'shame osve nami lahach didach. So then he turns to his attendant and says, bring out the leg that you have been hiding. So Osva Amar lahu hai bas chamesh raglayim avoy. And he turns to them, he says, you're going to serve me a 5-legged animal? You got 5 legs here. So Amar lei, so he proves to the Reish Galusa that these are devious servants. So ihachi li'avdu kamei demar v'leichel, or kamei shamei demar v'leichel. So he says, so he turns to Rav Sheshis and he says, you know what, I hear what you're saying, but if that's the case, then let's shech the new animal in your presence or in your attendant's presence and make sure that there's a mashkiach tamidi, and then eat with us. So Amar lei l'chayai. So he said, fine. So after they shechted it and they prepared the animal, krivu taka kamayu vaisu kamei bisra va'osivu kamei ristana dechanka chamasa. So the servants bring out his serving on a big plate, a nice big piece of meat. But what they had put into the meat was a cut of meat that had a bone from the hip that is extremely small, and you can choke on it. And again, they did this deliberately to get at Rav Sheshis. Remember, Rav Sheshis is blind, so this is really mean, okay? So, Gishashe v'shak lakarcha b'sudre, he feels his food, Rav Sheshis, and feels that there's this bone there. He picks it up, it's got a little meat on it, and he wraps it up in his handkerchief and puts it aside for a moment. So, Labasar da'achal amrile ignivlan casa de kaspa. So the servants, after the meal is finished, the servants had noticed that Rav Sheshis had put something from the meat and wrapped it up, and they wanted to find out what it was. So they said, oh, someone has stolen our silver goblet. We need to check all of our guests to make sure that you didn't steal a goblet. And that way they'll get to search what everyone has in their pockets. So bahadi dekama aini va'asi ashkechua dekrucha besudre. So they're checking everyone, and they check Rav Sheshis, and they say, oh, we see that you've wrapped up a piece of meat that we had served you. So Amri lei chazimar delo mechel kaboy elalitzauran. You see, Rav Sheshes won't eat our food. All he wants to do is make us work for him in order to make us dray. He's draying us a cup. He's not even eating all the hard work that we did. So Amr lahu ana mechel achli v'ta'ami beitama dechavira. So he said, what are you talking about? I did eat the meat. This was the part of the meat that I didn't eat because when I tasted it, I detected the flavor of tsaras. There must be some tsaras in this part of the flesh, and I didn't want to eat that. So, Amri lei chavira lo avid lan ha'idna. They said, what are you talking about? We checked the animal. The animal that we served did not have any kinds of wounds or afflictions or anything. So Amr lahu badku beduchte da Amr Rav Chisda uchma bechivra beuchmasa lakusahi. He says, do me a favor, check the hide of the animal in that place where the hip bone is that I didn't eat, because Rav Chisda had taught that if there's white in a black blotch, or if there's black in a white blotch, then that's a sign that underneath that part of the hide is meat that is diseased. So Badak Ashkechua, and they taka checked the hide, and they found out that their taka was a blotch by the hip, exactly as Rav Sheshes had described. Ki kanafik karu bira v'shadu tzifta iluya. Now listen to this deviousness. As he was leaving, they dug a pit and put a mat over it so that they would say, here, please come walk this way. He would walk over the mat and fall into the pit and either die or get seriously injured. So they said, please, Rav Sheshes, may the master come and walk this way and rest in our drawing room or whatever. So Nachar le Rav Chisda me'achure. So Rav Chisda grunted or snorted or did some kind of noise behind Rav Sheshes, indicating that he suspected that these guys couldn't be that nice, right? So Amar le liyanoka psokli psukecha. So then Rav Sheshes turns to a child who's in the room and he says, tell me, what pasuk did you learn in Cheder today? Amar le netelecha al yamincha o al smolecha. He quoted a pasuk from Shmuel Beis which says, either turn to the right or turn to the left, but don't go straight. Amar le l'shame maika chazis. So he turns to his attendant, now Rav Sheshes is blind, he says, tell me, what do you see directly in front of us? Amar leit si piece of the shadi. He says, I see a mat that's laying out on the ground. Amar lei hodar mine. He said, make sure we don't step on that mat. So lebasar denafik amalei Rav Chisda minaha v'yadamar. So after they leave, Rav Chisda says to him, how did you know to avoid that mat that had a pit underneath it? So Amar lei chada denachar limar. So first of all, because I saw you snort, indicating that you like a sarcastic kind of grunt, thinking, why would these people be so nice to you? Furthermore, the child told me the pasuk, so that was a good sign from Shemayim. And finally, because I know that these guys are not nice people, and if they offer to do something nice for you, it must mean that there's something devious behind it. Have a wonderful day.